Okay, so Wilford discovered Blackduck pottery at Blackduck Lake. It's characterized as having lips with flattened, thick lips decorated with cord wrapped stick. The exterior motif is a short oblique or without punctate over horizontal rows of cord wrapped stick. So the pottery is rounded with cord wrap paddle impressions. And here is an example of some of the pottery that, and this is from his Headwaters Lake aspects. 1958, in Canada, conducted excavations on sites in Manitoba. He discovered pottery impressed with cord wrap paddle and thickened lips. He called this pottery Manitoba quarterware, defined multiple types. He indicated this essentially was the same pottery as Blackduck. Manitoba corded ware terminology was dropped in favor of Blackduck by most researchers. Gail Evans in '61 did a ceramic analysis and general cultural relationships of Blackduck ware. He based his research on excavated in Minnesota, and he noted variation and defined, including the ones you can see below. Some of these were fit in with pottery in Canada, and some did not. 1976, Ken Dawson developed a modal system to analyze the variation he was seeing in pottery, a Blackduck pottery motif. And here's an example from Dawson 76, Appendix A, where he has modes and then he has variants. This system was expanded upon by Peter Carmichael examining pottery in Manitoba. His system was very complex. It utilized modes, variants, but also varieties, subvarieties, and double varieties. And I've got a slide of org chart of his system. Just you can see at the bottom the double varieties. So, and it was based on 4 secondary elements. So again, a complex system. Logan Beale, on his doctoral thesis, analyzed 7,000 Blackduck sherds from the Smith site in northern Minnesota. He compared this material to sites from 16 other sites in both northern Minnesota and Rainy River region. The inter-site comparative noted variations between specific attributes of Blackduck pottery other than motif. So whereas the modal system focused on motif variations, he was starting to see attribute differences with the pottery. The Minnesota ceramic hammock came out by Amsons in 1979. And here we start to see some division of Blackduck pottery into like temporal, into early and late periods, but also 31% of the vessels included had no exterior decoration and they were labeled as Blackduck plain. It is highly probable that these Blackduck plain vessels are misidentified Selkirk composite vessels. In 1981, Scott Hamilton developed the Luni system, and this was because the modal system could not accommodate the entire range of decorative variations seen on Blackduck pottery. It was a very comprehensive but complex coding system, and its placement of decorative elements, the type, and the orientation. Unfortunately, the lack of available computational power in the early 80s prevented the system's implementation. So just to summarize, we have all of the background, the origins, and the summary of Blackduck research. But basically, these all treated pottery with cord-wrapped object impressions as Blackduck. Similarly, if Princess Point pottery was brought up from Southern Ontario and showed to some of these researchers, they also would have just included it as Blackduck. So, is it reasonable to classify all of the highly variable late woodland pottery as Blackduck? And here's an example of a rim sherd that recovered by one of the sites on Lac Seul. It does have impression decoration on the lip. So, the Rainy River Composite was an idea put forth by Lenius and Olinyk in 1990. Basically, the premise was Laurel and Blackduck cultural groups coexisted for a period of 300 years, but had distinct pottery in that time, and that around 1000 AD, Blackduck and Laurel coalesced into one entity. So you have Rainy River pottery borrowing pottery traits from Blackduck and Laurel. And this is taxonomy into a Western woodland Algonquin configuration used by Lenius and Olinyk, and they've moved the Winnipeg River complex out of Selkirk into the Rainy River Composite. Issues with the Rainy River Composite. One, that a complex, in order to subdivide some of the pottery, it had to have representation in the burial mounds within Rainy River. Second issue was coalescence. Both groups coexisted for 300 years. So the idea that complexes must be represented within the mounds, the geographical distribution of mounds into the shield region is lacking. Second, although there's evidence, there's no evidence that the burial mounds remain important well into Late Woodland period. So evidence that burial mounds were important into that period. And if I'm identifying pottery on the shorelines of Lac Seul, where's the definitive guide that I can make a complex because my pottery is represented in the mounds? Okay, so this is way too restrictive a criteria to name new complexes. Issue 2, the idea of Blackduck Laurel coalescence. Jeffrey Richner, in his publication, quoting data from Rapp et al. And Thomas and Mather, along the stratified layers along the Rainy River, they have over 24 carbon dates, and there's no indication that Laurel pottery coexisted after around 700 AD, and there's no evidence of coexistence between the two groups. And this is in the heart of the Rainy River lake and system. Another piece of evidence by Scott Hamilton in the Manitoba Archaeology Journal. Basic idea of pottery with traits borrowed from both Laurel and Blackduck. We do have, and it's what I call bloral pottery, we do have that, but it occurs in relatively low frequencies. So while there may have been some temporal overlap between Blackduck and Laurel, it's unlikely that it ended up being a coalescence. It was more like a stimulus diffusion. So my recap is the archaeological evidence does not support the 300-year coexistence between Laurel and Blackduck. This is really the main pillar of the Rainy River Composite model. Representation with the mounds is too restrictive for naming new complexes. So I'm concluding that the Rainy River Composite model is problematic. However, can we say that all cord-wrapped object decorated pottery is Blackduck? There's a high degree of variability that exists in this Late Woodland pottery. So I'm proposing a new model, the Minontoba Composite. Minitoba region is defined as northern Minnesota, northwestern Ontario, and eastern Manitoba. It's a region comprised of intricate water system, primary, secondary, tertiary lakes and rivers. These transportation corridors interconnected the entire region, creating a complex travel network. And the bright light model illustrates the possible hypothetical movement of foraging groups within this region. So I'm just going to boot this up, and the bright light model is something I've developed, and it's based on each individual clan or group would be situated in a hypothetical homeland, and that using the rivers, they would move through the system. And I'm going to get this going. And this was the level of interaction. So I'm just going to let that go one more time. Okay, in short, that's the Blackduck. That's the bright light model, sorry. So in this idea, contact and interaction occurred between a new population making Blackduck pottery and a resident Laurel population. However, migration into this region, Minontoba region, by Blackduck people was limited based on the geography. The high degree of Late Woodland pottery variability is resulted from stimulus diffusion of a new pottery technology, that is, pots being manufactured within a woven bag. And so if we look at the diagram number 1, this is my map where we have Blackduck composite initial appearance around 700 AD. And then we have, by 800D, you've had an expansion into an interaction with people making laurel pottery, but the expansion into the shield was rather limited. On my map number 3, we have a further composite, limited in migration in the boreal forest, along with stimulus diffusion of the pottery technology. And in slide number 4, you have this transformation and emergence of the Minontoba Composite, where people are adopting the pottery made in a woven bag and modifying and incorporating the new technology using stimulus diffusion, their own ideas of clan identity. And we're seeing a retreat of laurel pottery north and west. And by 950 to 1000 AD, you have Minontoba sites within this large region. You have ongoing interactions and influences between both Blackduck, people making Blackduck, and laurel pottery. So how do we differentiate between Blackduck and Minontoba? Minontoba originated from the stimulus pottery, but ongoing cultural interactions occurred. So there's a high degree of similarity between the Blackduck and Minontoba wares. Is using departure points, whereas the departure point is classified as an alteration of a specific pottery attribute representing a trackable change that occurs over time and or space. So we use a narrow definition of Blackduck pottery, and then we can track the variations, i.e. the departures from that original. And then we can track them in terms of the presence or absence or the zonal application, primary decoration elements, or changes in element orientation. So these kind of incorporates the earlier ideas of Logan Beale and Hamilton. Have to develop a scoring system. So presence or absence or changes would represent one departure point. Pottery with only a single departure point from the tight definition of Blackduck would still be considered Blackduck. Pottery with 2 departure points is a bit of a gray area. Once we have 3 or more attributes of departure, it's no longer Blackduck. This is a very preliminary stage of development right now, and but it is based on the idea that the high degree of attribute variability pottery, all classified now as Blackduck, may be used to determine spatial and or temporal patterning. It represents a movement away from using Blackduck as a catch-all category for any pottery decorated with core-wrapped object impression. And this is the proposed revised taxonomy under the Minontoba Composite model. So just a summary, over time, Blackduck has become the catch-all category for any pottery from late woodland period decorated with core-wrapped object impression. However, a high degree of variation has been observed on Blackduck pottery in terms of exterior motif and other attributes such as surface finish, lip shape. There's many, many more. Improving our understanding of late woodland cultural groups within northwestern Ontario requires a movement away from lumping all of this pottery into one general category. Figuring out what nuances is a very complex task, but hopefully the proposed Minontoba Composite model is a step in the right direction. And that pretty much wraps up my presentation.